Hi, I'm Rachel from Sweetthorn. Welcome to my latest embroidery project update. It's been a while since the last update because I've been working on some new embroidery designs. I've put a link in the description if you want to take a look. In my last video, I'd finished my Petit Point snowdrop and I was looking at ideas for a silk shading project, also called needle painting. You might remember that I was planning to work out some sort of pomegranate design. I've certainly got plenty of photos now, but I'm still working on what design to choose. I'd like a project that offers a bit of a challenge, but it needs to be easy enough to finish in a month or two. First things first anyway, I've never done silk shading, so I needed to learn more about it. You've probably seen a lot of very beautiful pieces of embroidery which have been made with silk shading. It uses one strand of thread or silk at a time, and the colour changes are very subtle. I saw this kimono at the V&A in London a while ago. You can see how an experienced artist blends the threads so carefully and stitches an immense amount of detail. Going right back to the beginner end of the scale, I got started with a simple exercise to help me feel more familiar with the technique. I've drawn out a block pattern which I'm going to fill with different shades, moving gradually from a dark red to a bright pink. For silk shading, the preferred method for anchoring threads is the stab stitch method. A couple of tiny stitches secure the thread before starting and keep the surface of the embroidery completely smooth. The knot sits on the right side of the fabric and can be cut off once the thread is secure. Silk shading is worked in long and short satin stitch. Satin stitch often begins with split stitch guidelines, which help keep the satin stitching neat. In terms of technique, long and short stitch isn't too complicated, but it does take concentration, especially when you're trying to create a blended effect between shades. The stitch itself is very simple, but the stitches need to be worked delicately and precisely. It's hard to get a really subtle effect, and the more detailed the design, the more concentration you need. I used Sarah Homfray's silk shading book and the Embroidery Stitch Bible by Barnden to help me figure out long and short stitch. I haven't done a stitch tutorial on this method yet, so I've got one planned for the end of the month. For those of you watching in the future, it's already available. Following the instructions from Sarah Homfray, I started in the middle of the design with a long stitch, covering the whole of the first section of the grid. I took the needle down over the top of the split stitch line, which was a useful guide for the edge of the grid. The next stitch was half the length, placed as closely to the first one as I could. The first section wasn't too tricky, I just needed to fill it in with staggered stitches. It's a bit fiddly trying to place the threads as closely as possible. It's very difficult to get smooth coverage with only one strand of embroidery floss. I used the weave of the linen to help me place the stitches. It's not even weave linen, and obviously it's quite tightly woven. It might have been better to use my magnifying lamp, but that didn't occur to me because I could usually find the right place by the feel of it. A magnifier might have helped me avoid gaps later on though. Once I started the second section with the next colour, I needed to pay attention to what I'd stitched where. At this point I wasn't alternating between long and short stitches anymore. The stitches are all the same length, but they follow the staggered design of the first section. As before, half of my stitches are covering the second section fully. The other half reach into the first section to join with the shorter stitches and create the effect of two colours blending. I got into a bit of a rhythm. Each block followed the previous one with the same technique. At this point, although the stitching wasn't very complicated, I needed to keep track of where I was in the sequence, as well as keeping the stitches as close as possible. This turned out to be rather tricky with single strands of similar coloured threads. You can see that I marked the colours on the grid to make it easier to pick up the next new colour and move on. It also helped me to keep an eye on the sections I was stitching, so that I didn't muddle the colour progression. When I got to the final section, I needed to finish the grid with an extra row of short stitches. You can see how the split stitch works here as well, to give some definition to the end of the block. So this is the finished sampler. I think what I'm most happy with is my choice of thread shades, because they do graduate quite nicely from dark red to bright pink. And you can see that the red and pink are quite different shades when they're side by side. Keeping the stitches close and even is still the biggest challenge I have with all types of satin stitching. After a while I was tempted to go back and fill in some of the gaps. I can see where I missed the nearest point in the weave, or where I might have got mixed up with the staggered stitches. It would have been tricky to fill in the gaps without muddling the pattern further. As this is a practice sampler, I left the mistakes where they were so that I could see what I needed to improve on for next time. It's a little bit frustrating because it's theoretically such a simple technique, but it requires a lot of precision, so it's not going to be easy to perfect quickly. So my next task now is to start looking through my pomegranate photos and work out a design. I'll need to make a sketch and map out the colours so that I have some reference points. After that, keeping the stitches neat and the colours subtle will be a challenge, but that is the point. That's all for now. Thanks very much for watching. Please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel if you want to see what happens next. Also remember to keep an eye out for a new stitch tutorial later in the month. Bye for now.